Okay, we have copped out though because we started last week by saying, "Oh, we're real martyrs and we're in the woods," and because it's too windy to run a session, we're now in your kitchen.
Yeah, it probably sounds all weird and echoey.
I mean, we can still. Would it?
Hang on, wait 1 second. I'm gonna stick the microphone out the door and see if the wind works. I don't know if you could hear that, but that is proof that it is too windy to run a session. I just stuck it outside.
Yeah.
There we go.
Brilliant.
Yeah, just a bit of atmosphere, in case anyone was like missing the sound of the outdoors.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about Vivian Gustin Paley's You Can't Say, You Can't Play, which we've briefly mentioned on other podcasts because we've said we were going to read it. I can't even remember why. How did we come across it? Why did we say we were going to read it?
You sent it to me.
Yeah, but how? Why? I think...
I don't remember.
So Vivian Gustin Paley came up with the idea of helicopter stories, which maybe we've talked about in the podcast before.
Maybe in passing, but not in detail.
Anyway, that's the thing that we do have a look at what it is. That's a separate podcast probably. But that's how I kind of found out about her. And then this kind of ties into that podcast we did on like play and democracy.
That was where I think we were looking up things about democratic play.
Yeah.
And there was a... sorry, I'm undoing all the pages you folded.
I just folded over the Magpie Story sections.
Oh, okay. They can get in the bin. We'll get to them. Sorry, what I was looking up was I was trying to work out when this book was published.
Oh, it was 1991.
It was published in 1991, was it?
Yeah.
1992 copyright.
1992.
And I was confused because it then said 1929. I was like, Jesus, this is an old book. And then I realised, no, she was born in 1929.
Okay. In America, so she's an American early years practitioner, kindergarten teacher. And some of the reviews I've read of it since say, oh my gosh, I looked at when it was written and my jaw hit the floor because I thought it was from the 60s, I thought it was from the 70s, and it's got that vibe about it, hasn't it? It's very, it just feels old time. Feels like a different era. Yeah,
it's an interesting... I mean, partly that's the cover and the choice of, literally judging the book by its cover. It's very 60s. But yeah, the way it's written, and also I think one of the parallels I draw is like, they say if you watch old films compared to modern films, the pace is so much slower. The editing is like, you've got real time, and it's all about... maybe people who are fans of Friends, Smell the Fart acting, the meaningful look Joey says he does on TV, just kind of, well, you won't see it, but when he goes, and it pauses, and it reads a bit like that. It reads so slowly and so kind of like a preschool teacher telling you a lovely story, and when children, and we're doing this, whereas the things I think that speak to me a bit more are the punchier, like, you do this, you do that, here's your ethos, let's challenge
you're
that.
Used to reading things like that. The premise is that she has been working as a teacher for a long time, I think, already by the time she's writing this book. And she is noticing through her work that there are children that are very often excluded from the play of the rest of the group.
The sane children are often excluded.
And she is wondering what to do about it, and she kind of always just deals with it in terms of, like, she's noticing like one particular child going and crying in her cubby hole the whole time, and the cubbies, she's crying in the cubbies. Which
confused me because I thought the cubbies were like little boxes, like a locker, and then I was imagining a child getting into her locker, but maybe it's
I think it's more like a little reading corner.
Like oh, okay.
I don't know, a little corner, a cosy corner of some kind, and a little boy constantly being told that he's not welcome to join the other children's play, and she's kind of dealing with it case by case and going, oh well, you come along and tell me a story then, and
putting plasters on it emotionally, just going like, patch that up, and then going, well, maybe I can take away the thing that's cutting them. It's that kind of analogy, isn't it?
Yeah. So she sets up this idea that what if we have a new rule, which is you can't say you can't play. It is literally a rule that you cannot say no if somebody says, can I play? And before she puts it in place in her kindergarten classroom, she asks her kindergartners what they would think of that rule, and she also asks children further up the school and says, we're thinking of having this rule, what do you think? And she kind of records, well, she doesn't, I don't know if there's a bit at the back that talks about her methodology at all. I haven't really looked at that.
That was one of the things I wanted to talk about.
Because it's written in the present tense, which is quite interesting. So she's writing out the conversation she's having with the children, as she's saying, what do you think would happen if I replace this rule? And those conversations are really interesting to read.
Mm-hmm.
I am interested to know whether or not she did record those conversations and transcribe them.
Yeah.
They're not written like a transcription. They are written like
a
prose,
story, like a
they?
novel kind
yeah.
of. Yeah.
So I wonder if those things have been edited by her.
They seem too concise in the way that the way that children speak is not this direct, and I don't want to belittle children, right? But children do not speak in a way that's this direct and relevant and to the point.
Yeah.
And there's no hint that they might be forming ideas as they talk, or that someone's viewpoint has changed, or as we have in The Woods, that the child just randomly starts listing their address and what colour their door is every time. How are we feeling today? Well, I'm and I live in the thing and the what, and I've got a red dog. And what are you doing? That's not what we're doing, mate.
And they always also talk. There's a few lines from the TV show Captain Underpants in there as well.
Yeah.
Always.
It's mental.
love it.
But so then you read this book, and maybe she's at a school of incredibly eloquent children who have all had debating lessons. But she, puts a theory to them, and they respond in a very edited way.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah. So she's not kind of saying. It's a tale, isn't it? She's telling a tale, and then she's also telling a tale within that tale, which we'll get onto in a minute. But but what I did like about it, what I find interesting, is kind of documenting that process. So talking to the children about it's meta, right? So talking to children about what you're doing and discussing it together, I really found.
But not even about what you're doing, what you might do.
Yeah.
Because that's what I was just looking up. Is this book is 130 odd pages.
Yeah.
And she implements the idea at page 80.
Yeah.
So there's nearly over half the book is her sitting down with children and going, we're definitely not doing this today, but what do you think about? And then I think part of that is you're like you said, it's an interesting process of talking it all through and making sure they've come to grips with the idea. But it also strikes me that the large percentage of what she's writing about, it has no grounding in rubber hits the road. It's all theory, and it's all the theory of children.
I still find that interesting. I agree. It's you couldn't necessarily use it as a piece of evidence in order to ascertain whether or not her idea works.
Well, that's what I think. So I think when I looked at some reviews, there were lots of people saying, I implemented this, today and 4 years ago, and I've never looked back, or I've done whatever else. And I'm not sure that I think that it's a good enough, like you say, piece of evidence to inform practice. Is it an interesting insight into what children will think about rules? Yes. Is it an interesting insight into the social world of children? Yes, it's quite interesting. Does it have any sort of meat and substance? It's kind of it feels a bit like the proposal at the start of a scientific experiment. They're talking very much about what their process is going to be, what they expect the outcome to be, but we're not getting the results table here.
Yeah. As a little kind of example of the kind of conversation she's having with the children in the chapter called The Habit of Rejection. So she's talking about they're in Arizona. She's talking about what other she went to Arizona. She had this chat with other teachers. So she's often going away on conferences, isn't she? And she always feels a bit bad about actually leaving her children, especially those children that are very often rejected. And she feels like she's their only voice. And then when she goes on a conference...
Part of it is she's lost her voice, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And that's why she's I'm going to put something in place. So
physically lost her voice. She's got an infection or whatever.
And she says, I need something so that the children don't... Well, I think the way she puts it is so that I don't have to talk all the time, which is interesting because it's not... Can they resolve it themselves, or are they, But anyway, sorry.
Yeah. Or she's talking to the children about talking to these Arizona teachers, and and that the Arizona teachers also say that their children reject one another, and the children say, what do the teachers do? Well, first they try and convince the children to be kind and let one another play, but if that doesn't work, they help the one who's rejected and find another playmate, just as we do. The children have learned rejected, no euphemism will do. Rejection in play is the forerunner of all the rejections to come. Of course, the feeling begins much earlier in life's first separations. We're so vulnerable once we are alone at school. Like, that is an interesting, like, to talk about rejection in school and those feelings of vulnerability, I found kind of interesting. It makes you think about it. You know, it might be an issue that,
and the way they frame it as an inevitability, and that it's a brand that sticks on you, and that you know, it's I guess in some ways that it's not taking something very scientific. I know I just said that it's not, but it's not saying as an isolated incident, and these were the, you know, it's going, but over the whole of schooling, and this is a feeling people have. And
and then she says that some of the Arizona teachers think it's probably best to just let the children figure out these problems for themselves. So this is what it's really about, isn't it? Is, do we let these children figure out these problems for themselves, or what is our role as the adult in the situation, and how far do we step in, and if we step in, what do we do? And so, what do we figure out for ourselves, Charlie asks me. Well, your play and your stories, I don't say what they must be about. You don't tell us what to paint, Smita says, but Jennifer always tells me. She likes to give people advice, I say, but you don't always do what she tells you, right? Angelo wants to know what else I don't tell the children. I try not to tell you what thoughts or opinions to have, is my less than honest answer, at a time when I am single-mindedly pushing new attitudes about play. Well, we have to come to the rug and come to a discussion, but I don't tell you what to say in the discussion, I hasten to point out, and I listen to everyone, and we have to take turns to talk. This is the first time the children examine my role with such intensity. So I just find that really, I do find that really interesting, and I really, talking about teaching, talking about the group, even with little children, it's a bit like philosophy for children. I kind of like looked into a little bit. When I did my masters, which was nothing to do with this really, but it was about the role of imagination in the English classroom and getting children to write in role a lot, and so then children, the reason that interested me is because children who didn't like writing, didn't write very often, were a bit like, oh, this is not my bag. When I was asking them to write in role as a character from Of Mice and Men or Romeo and Juliet, whatever, they would just write this incredible piece. They'd write like a diary entry, nothing too, I wouldn't be like, write a letter to your solicitor about blah blah blah, I'd be like a diary entry. And you'd read it and you were like, oh my goodness. And so then I interviewed them about their experience of doing it, and that's what I found really interesting. And I remember the fact that, and how they kind of sat and how they spoke at being asked, at being interviewed in the first place, that somebody was interested enough in
valued,
them
I guess,
and their opinion and their experience in order to like record that and transcribe it. They behaved, and you know, because for moral reasons, you tell a class what you're doing, and you're like, I'm not teaching you any differently. However, I need to tell you and let you know that the work we're doing is going to be the subject of this dissertation. You get parent consent and all that kind of thing. And the class behaves differently when they know that's going on. And I think it's a really positive thing. I think it's a positive shift. I didn't notice any child go, oh, this is weird, what are you doing? I think they all kind of took it as a like, whoa, you value us and our work and our opinions enough to be bothered to write about it, which I think confers some kind of status and like a new relationship between the practitioner and the
also,
children.
I think it kind of implies or infers, I can't remember which one it is, a sort of level of humility that you are not an all, because a lot of teaching people will kind of say, you know, fake it till you make it, just pretend you know, be bullshit and be whatever, and actually to be able to go in not so many words perhaps, but to go, oh, I'm reflecting on what I'm doing, because this is what I want to do and I want to do it better, and I'm not perfect and I'm maybe going to do all that, and that's interesting for children. You know, it's tying it to Forest School, you know, we do a lot of stuff of reflection and how did the session go and doing whatever else, and I wonder, I mean, I don't know that we've necessarily ever done it, but how, if you do a reflection at the end of your session, how often you as a leader would reflect back, not on the activities, but on your performance as a leader. Would you sit with a group of children and go, do you know what, I think we've had a really good day. I was a little bit unhappy with how I spoke to you when we were over there and digging, because I was worried that you were going to hurt yourself, but on reflection I think maybe next time I would do this to you. How many people would be that frank and honest?
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it?
You know, because we would say to children, you would expect them maybe to go, well, I've had a good day, but when I talk to,
Yeah.
not that just we reflect on negative things, but that you would expect children to reflect back on their
Yeah.
behaviours and how they spoke to each other and
Yeah.
kind of go, well, are you going to be better tomorrow?
And if you did that,
you know.
it would set the tone for that and set that atmosphere of honesty, wouldn't it? And vulnerability, because it is about being vulnerable. Because definitely, I would say that we started doing more mini reflections, haven't we, with our
Yes,
younger groups at break and lunch, and I tend to start those reflections not by going, right, we're all doing a reflection now, but while I'm halfway through munching a snack, I'm like, oh, I really like this today, but I was a bit scared, or I found this a bit difficult. So I've tried to make sure that there's always a less than positive
Something that makes it
aspect to
accessible.
but I've never done it about my practice like that.
Is that a bit how the sausage is made? Do you want children to know? Because...
Oh, no, do you know what? That's not true. I think we do that. I've definitely heard you say, like, maybe stuff that's not so personal, like if you're teaching a knot, for example, you might go, oh, hang on a minute, scrap that, I've just explained that in a really bad way. I have definitely do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think we are doing that on a smaller level. And the same with parenting as well. It's, it's that thing of do you parent in a way that, like, oh, I made a mistake, but just plow on through and don't admit weakness, or do you go, I'm sorry, I lost my temper there and I really shouldn't have, and I'm definitely the latter. Like, I'd much rather apologise for something that I have done.
Guess
and I'm sure we have done that with the kids.
I think part of it is when you're talking about reflecting openly with children, is for younger children, they don't necessarily have a concept that you are in any way having a metacognition of how you behave around them. They just take you saying and doing everything you do as, well, that's just how you say things, rather than thinking. And then, so I don't think they would have a concept of it, but I would find it so an older child, say 8, 9, 10, who would understand the idea that you go, I'm performing a service here, I'm doing whatever. And then I think I worry that you might detract something from, you might sort of like put a bit of a sour taste on any relationship, because anytime, if you got into your head thinking that, like, if I thought you were putting on a show for me or were behaving as a, I don't know, I know you're not because of the way you act around me, but like, if I thought you were behaving intentionally in a way when you were near me, if we then ever had like a real moment of connection or whatever, I would then start to second guess it and go, oh, but is she doing, especially, in a situation where you're being paid, and you might go, oh, well, are they, you know what I mean? It's just an interesting...
I kind of do, but I kind of feel like children are pretty savvy to, like, their lives are mostly full of relationships with teachers or other kind of, like, authority.
But how many of them are honest about the fact that they're performing a particular, teaching, you might go, well, I'm here to impart knowledge. Forest School, you've got a bit more of a, like, we're building a relationship and it's all this kind of, we're getting to know each other. And then you go, well, would you be getting to know me if you weren't being paid? No, because I'm a ruthless capitalist. And,
obviously,
I see dollar signs when I look at you.
That's why you work in Forest School, isn't it? Yeah. So you're a capitalist.
Exactly.
Don't know. It is very emotive, this idea of, like, the child that is, I think we were talking about a difference. So if you look at, like, free play is a massive part of Forest School, and choice being a massive part of Forest School, and then rejection. So we've talked about this, and and in It's Okay Not to Share, like, it's a big thing, isn't it? So, for example, the example Heather Schumacher is like a group of girls or a group of boys making a den and then going, this is girls only, no boys allowed, making a sign that says that, and all this kind of stuff.
And that's why this book is challenging, because it's a direct antithesis of that.
Yes, exactly. But we briefly spoke the other day about the difference between that kind of rejection and the persistent rejecting of one or two children, and also the contact time. So if you were a teacher in a class of 30 kids and you've got the same 30 kids 5 days a week, 9 till 3, and it is 3 kids in your class who just are never allowed to play and their lives are miserable, then I would say that's gone from rejection to almost bullying. Like, that's another step of...
Well, I think there's what I would say about this book, and I just like cards on the table. I finished the book and I don't agree with it. I don't, I found it really interesting. I think you should read things that challenge your practice.
Yeah.
But at the end of it, I've come out and I've gone, no, I'm pretty confident in what I'm doing. Because part of what I think the difficulty with this idea, and that it is fully, a child, you and your friend are playing princesses, and someone else comes up and says, "Can I play princesses?" And you have to say yes, right? And what I think that is shutting off is the chance for children to have a dialogue about why they might not feel comfortable or not feel safe. So, and I'm taking that, this kind of this book kind of, I think Vivian, when she's writing the book, partly I think she feels a large amount of guilt when she sees children being shunned because she feels responsible for it.
Yeah.
But also I think that she writes this book from the perspective that like the rejection is like an illogical or a social kind of like, we don't like Gemma, and so we're all going to say no to Gemma.
Yeah,
right?
You've got to look at the reasons.
But it could be
happening.
that Gemma is too rough and the other children don't like it.
Yeah.
And in this system of like, you can always play, and they're not allowed to, and they say that the children can't put caveats on it. They can't say, well, you can play if, or you can play whatever.
Yeah.
It's, you just have to let Gemma play.
Going back to what you said about there being roughy-tufty, that's glossed over very briefly, isn't it? They do bring that up, and they say, what if the person being rejected is rejected because they're just horrible and mean? Like they don't play nicely, so they come in and they just ruin the game, and they're horrible to everyone and they push everyone. And I think she says, or somebody else says, well, the other children just keep telling them not to do it, and then they stop doing it.
Yeah.
And it's like, and so it's looking at what,
and it's not giving, and I think part of the way that we've kind of encouraged children to interact, where they go, if and we've had it, haven't we, where children have been constantly shut out of games, and actually the thing we've gone in and said is, can you tell me why you don't want so and so to play, which you hope transitions away from you needing to be there to the point where if that person went and asked, the children wouldn't go through you, they would just say to that person, we don't want you to play because of X. And that's valuable social feedback for that person who's being rejected. And I'm not denying, if there's a kid who's constantly being rejected just because they don't like her, just because he's not the flavour of the week. Or even she talks
about like colour of skin and colour of hair, doesn't she, and gender.
So those are, I think there's separate things there, but it is valuable feedback that the children aren't getting if they're always allowed to play, and the other children are always left feeling, oh, I wish they knew that, like, I don't, she takes up too many of the bricks, or that he runs faster in that game and the game isn't fun, and you're taking away that dialogue from them, and so these children that are introducing themselves to play never get like an honest and quick social feedback that just goes, well, you can play, but only if you run with us. You don't run on ahead.
Or you can. I don't want you to play. Why? Because you always push me.
Yeah.
So we've had that, haven't we? In terms of like, can I ask why? Because I'm scared. I'm scared of that child, and I'm scared that they're going to push me or hit me. And then you can go reflect back to the child and go, are you going to do that? They're scared that you're going to do that. That you're going to hurt them. Are you going to? No. And then if they do, then that's again your place to go and go, well, you said you weren't going to, and you have, so now we're going to do something else. They talk about the children's right to leave the game, don't they? So they talk about that quite a lot and say, well, I'm playing with my best friend, and then somebody comes along who I don't mind, but my best friend doesn't like. So if I say yes to this other person, my best friend is going to leave the game. Yeah. And then where does that leave me? And then they kind of say, well, it's your right to leave. If you want to leave the game, then you can just leave the game, but you have to say yes to somebody joining. And so I kind of wonder how that would pan out if you had... if it was a more valid reason for not wanting to play with the child, like you're scared of them, then what pattern are you getting into there, where a group says, okay, yes, you can play because you have to say yes, otherwise we're going to get told off.
Not because they want you to play. Yeah. That's, again, we're talking, we go back to like a motivation thing, and are the children, we're talking here, these incredibly eloquent children have this conversation where they're like, well, the person who doesn't want you to play but lets them play, they're still playing, but the person who gets rejected, they're sadder because they don't get to play at all.
Yeah.
And they have this weird thing where the children are understanding it through empathy, but actually I think 80% of the children in here would.
It's not empathy.
No, it's not empathy. It's fear of like.
That's really
Miss is going to tell me off.
Yeah, this is
if I
really
don't
what
let
this
you
book is
play.
about. It's about what is empathy? How do you instill it in children? Is it your role to instill it in children? Does it happen naturally? Like.
Can you fake it essentially? Can you fake empathy until you make it? No, because I think the children in this book are just going to feel. You know, like I say, there isn't a huge amount of like, we did it for 5 years, we've done it for 10 years, these are the pitfalls and whatever. It's all hypothetical. And I feel like the children in this book are just going to end up having no ownership over their own play because they know at any point someone can come and change what they're playing and who can live in it. You know, you were talking last time about playing Monopoly and like, it's a very different game if you agree to a set of rules and you play that game through to the end than if you played the game and you're constantly looking at the door in case somebody comes in who goes, fuck it, it's risk now, boom, you know, flips the board. And how do you play a game knowing that, you know, it's like a...
Yeah, and then your role as teacher is you're still involved in kind of maybe moderating this new person and going, oh, hold on a minute, you're not being very fair to these other people, blah, 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 blah. I was going to say something. We talked a bit about this being like the picture she paints of their kind of average day. Seems really free play heavy, doesn't it? Like the play that she's describing is like very involved and very intense, and it has the chance to continue.
Oh, I didn't get that.
Oh, I did. I kept that. You know, we always play Cinderella and all this kind of stuff. And we talked a bit about how things might be different in a UK classroom right now. So maybe in like early years you might still be there, but if you're looking further up, the actual space in the day that children have to free play and how this rule might affect that if they're only getting, say, an hour a day, which is complete free choice without any adult intervention.
But minimal adult intervention.
Yeah. Does that make a case more for this kind of rule? Because if somebody is always rejected in that
you've only got 20 minutes and you get rejected,
never get to
you fucked
play.
your day.
Like they never play. So you have got to curate that hour of free play much more heavily and ensure that everybody's getting access to that. You don't really have time to go, okay, cool, they just want to play with themselves right now, but they might want to play with you later because there is no later. So you don't have time, or whether you could look at it the other side and go, that play is so valuable for those children that are in that play.
Should you let anyone interrupt
to then adulterating it by forcing them to let other people join is even more damaging. I just had another thought as well that I really want to talk about. Oh, damn it, what was I going to say? Can't remember.
Well, I think one of the things when I was... Well, okay, this might be a good point then to talk about. One of the things that I found the most uncomfortable about this book, and it's not that it's mentioned often, but the way that it's mentioned gives it like an inordinate amount of weight. And I can't find it in here, but there's a Bible quote about like, if you accept the stranger, then you are the whatever, and it's one Bible quote, right? So, okay, right, I appreciate that some people follow the Bible and it's a, you know, they're teaching people whatever, but to base a large part of children's education and social learning on an abstract thing, and she kind of leans on it. You know, I think she is a person with faith, and she kind of leans on it for me quite heavily in terms of like, well, it's in Peter 3, Mark 2, so it, you know, so it's been around, you know, and I'm like, well, it's been around a long time, but so is like stoning people to death who wear mixed fabrics. You know, that is equally one line in the same book. I mean, you can't, to pick one and not the other is inconsistent, and I feel like that's one of the things that makes me a bit uncertain about the book, is that it's not standing on strong pillars of evidence and practice and research. It's built on a kind of her guilt and a quote she got from the Bible and a feeling she has about children's play, and that is a little bit kind of shaky for me. And maybe that's where I would feel better if it was like, this is how I started the idea, and now here's a load of examples of how it has worked.
Yeah.
I would feel like, oh, okay, the origin story to me, meh. But if you're showing me a
Yeah.
thing that improves children's play
Yeah.
and their social development, then
Yeah.
great. But if you're just going to talk to me for 80 odd pages
Yeah.
about a conceptual idea you sort of had based on a thing you haven't tried, that makes me feel a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah. I've remembered what I want to say now.
Okay.
And it's about, like, it goes back to that nature of rejection. So she's just kind of going, rejection. Rejection is awful. Rejection is horrible. It stays with you forever. It's going to affect you. So if you're the kid that's rejected in kindergarten, you are still going to grow up to be a really, like, emotionally damaged adult, and
Yeah.
it's not going to go away. And it starts then. And we've got to stop other humans doing that to each other and making them feel that way. And I'm kind of interested in going back to what we said about, like, why. So, like, if you could kind of categorize different types of rejection.
Yeah.
So whether it be kind of like just prejudice, so children
Yeah,
go, you have a different colour of skin to me, therefore you can't play. So asking why, and if you get to that, then what do you do as a practitioner about it? Whether it is about kind of natural child development, social, like finding out their social
Tribalism,
group,
you know.
finding out, okay, we're all girls, okay, what makes us girls, and let's be extra girly, all of that kind of stuff. Learning about friendship. So I can't remember whether it was those programs, The Secret Life of 4-year-olds. I think it was 4-year-olds, where they have the hidden cameras, and then the kind of like
They just experiment on kids. It's awful.
and they sit there with microphones, and they all these experts.
They put kids in situations that they know they're going to fail in,
Yeah.
and then watch it from a camera and go, oh, can you believe that we gave all the kids chocolate and told them not to eat it? And then what, little naughty sucker it or whatever.
Those bits are awful. The bits that I find more interesting are just where the kids are at free play, and they're just being recorded, and they just, like, comment on what's happening.
Yep.
So there's some particularly kind of, sort of mean, rejecting behaviour at one point in the show. I think it's like, no, you can't come down the slide. The slide is only for us two. But it's like a group of, I think it's a group of 3 people, I think girls, and they spend the whole day, like, toing and froing between 1 minute being like, yeah, we're all best friends. Sorry.
If you like this podcast and want to support more episodes, you can donate through Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Children of the Forest to show your support for the Forest School podcast.
It's a group of 3 people, and 2 of them are going, oh no, you can't, this is just for us now. But then later in the day they are like, you're my best friend, I love you.
Yeah, they're just playing with it.
Exactly. And they kind of I just remember them talking, the experts in air quotes, talking about, like, at this age this is really common because that's how we learn what friendship is, by breaking it, by testing it, by stretching the boundaries and going, if I say this to you, what are you going to do? Are you still going to be my friend, or are you going to be like, get away from me, I never want to see you again? How does that feel? How does it feel to be...
You've got to fall off the bike.
Yeah, and it's like
thing,
about that power and that, how does it feel to do that? The trouble is, which I completely get, the trouble is there are definitely some children for whom that feeling of power and that feeling of rejecting becomes quite addictive, and they talk about a lot in this book about bosses, and I find that really interesting, and about what our role is in that, and whether we, because that's not necessarily healthy.
That maybe needs a bit more explanation, because that's not a thing that we have in our setting. It's not a thing I've experienced in other settings.
Or about people being...
So they have this thing in her school, wherever she's mainly based, that boss. All games have a boss at the start of her kind of description, and so the boss is normally whoever makes the game up.
Yeah.
So it's normally somebody who's very extroverted, who kind of goes, you and you, let's go and play princesses, or let's run over here, and that person's the boss. And then they talk about the implication of, like, can just the boss let people into the game, or can anybody let people into the game? And what happens if you vote? Does the person joining get a vote? Does the so that's an interesting thing, because I've not really...
I think if you looked at the play of our younger children and
I'm
tried
sure
to
there are
work out
leaders, but
who's
the idea of there
leader here.
being a boss, explicitly a boss,
Yeah.
because I think there's a very big difference between explicitly putting on, making a show of, well, no, I'm the boss, it's my game, whereas I don't know that I've...
Oh, we have had that. We have literally had those words. Do you remember? We've had children coming up to us and saying, I'm not really happy because so-and-so says they're the boss, and some people are fine with that, but I'm not really fine with that because they're making me do stuff I don't want to do because they're the boss. Do you remember that?
Yes.
There you go. So
Sorry, but that's one example. That's not a consistent type of thing.
But what I'm talking exactly about that kind of example where it's actually not healthy for that child either to
for the
develop
boss.
that type of behaviour, and that's how they play. They play with that sense of, I need to be in control, and I can see completely why
Well,
they
that
end up
kind
doing
of factors
that.
into some children have other needs,
Of course.
which
Of course.
that mean that they fit one role more than the other,
Yeah.
or they.
But for those
you know.
children who don't necessarily have you know, additional needs in that kind of way, I can see how it might be a pattern of behaviour that you can fall into unless that's challenged in some way, even if it is a very gentle kind of.
Yeah.
Or can you not? Do you just have to let it ride? And
Someone's just got a more bolshy personality.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes that can. It's interesting seeing that. So we have some pairs of like siblings that will come, or groups of siblings that come, and it's interesting sometimes seeing that dynamic is, as you might expect, older child is the more dominant person, but that sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's the middle one, because they're the middle one, has become so much more bolshy that actually that they dictate it. Or even the little ones, the younger ones even they go, no, I'm going to see what happens if I push back and I assert on this, and whether the person who was the boss can go, oh, I'm not okay. You know, the leaders can go, okay, maybe it's your turn to lead for a bit.
I was thinking about that as Forest School as an environment for play being different to home and school, and thinking about whether like our groups that are regular and it's children from lots of different places. So a group like a Saturday morning, for example, where kids are coming from all different schools. Some of them might know each other, but on the whole they don't. And it's like almost like a level playing field, and it's more mixed age. And how sort of reading this book, I was thinking about how rejection doesn't happen very often in those groups. It happens more often if children do know each other, and they almost bring with them those things from school, and then but even still when they do, so I've had like parents drop off and go, oh, I can see so and so's here today, they do have issues at school, just to make you aware. And so I've been on the lookout for it, and actually you can see the moment where the penny drops and you go, oh, okay, I don't actually have to be horrible to you here. Like the social pressures of school mean that I have to be like, no, you are annoying, or you are the loser, but
well, you're just not in my class, or you're not in my year, and you know, all of that play.
It's kind of like a level playing field, which I really like, and it reminded me a bit of when I was teaching secondary, I had a drama club, and the children that chose to come were just such a random bunch of like weirdos, and I can say that with love, right? Because I was the weirdo going, hey weirdos, let's be weird.
You were the weird beacon.
But yeah, and I kind of feel like in a way maybe optional Forest School, as in, you know, a programme that people decide to come to, as opposed to you're dropping into a class and doing Forest School an afternoon a week. An optional thing like a holiday club or a you know, extracurricular activity, let's say, is less likely to be fraught with these issues, because everyone's kind of drawn to it because they like that style of.
Well, I think part of what makes Forest School. So this book is interesting because she's divided up her conversations by year group, and they're very the children. It's interesting as she goes up, the children are more and more not scathing, but like she says, they're almost reminiscent and nostalgic already. You know, the 8-year-olds are going, well, maybe if you'd put it in when we were 5, but
because we were nicer
we're
then.
too old and wizened now, and all this stuff.
Kindergartners are nicer; they're nicer humans.
But I think part of it is kind of in the school system. It's like it's a bit subconscious, but but because we're split by age, you then kind of, for most of the day, it's reinforced to you that like these children are working at a higher level than you, and those children are working at a lower level than you, and that's why you've been split. And even inside a class, and you know, let me tell you, if you're a teacher that thinks that you're like, oh, you're not the low group, you're the triangle group, right? It's bullshit. The children know what's fucking going on, right? But this whole idea of division. But in Forest School, when you do, because a lot more of it is physical, when you go, right, shall we make a den, there isn't like a, right, well, you get to build with the biggest, unless you're doing Forest School really badly, you're building with the bigger sticks, and you're going to, you know, you just go, there's the fucking woods, right? A 5-year-old can pick up most of the same sticks as an 8-year-old can. And so there's this massive leveler, or you just, you know, the way that we approach things with children is a lot more optimistic. Because like we were talking about with that ZPD, and it's moving and shifting, and we're doing whatever with it, in a lesson you go, right, here is this level of like sentence work we're doing today, we're going to do fronted adverbials or whatever, but but with a...
Some children will be able to use an adverb
Well,
for a
kind of,
fabulous
yeah.
thing. Most children will be able to bloody blah. All children will be able to bloody blah, and we don't have that.
But what I mean is we just arrive with, we're going to do some knot work, and we did this yesterday with a group where we didn't go, you are 5, so we're going to give you the chunky rope. We just went, here's the rope. Do you all want to have a go at this rope? You're 8, you're 5. You know, my little boy was there, he wasn't joining in with the ropes. But we put it there and just went, go for it. And that is a massive leveler, because they are then judging each other on the content of their character and how they interact, because they're not giving this weird, you know, like, oh, the girls go over here and the boys go over here, or let's divide you by year group, or let's do whatever else. And so I think one of the things that I would say about this book is kind of the school system infers a lot of like exclusion into children. That is the way of the world, because that's how you're set up and that's how you do it. And so it seems then very natural. What do? You imitate the adults. What do the adults do? They split us into groups and they infer us. Oh God, it doesn't take long for me to go off on schools, does it? It really has become like a match to, I don't know, oil.
But I kind of agree with you, like going back to that podcast we did the other day about democracy and play, and what's his name? The bloke who wrote the article that we were talking about.
I can't remember
the
now.
bloke. You know, Peter Gray.
Yes.
So Peter Gray describes play being the ultimate democratic act, because if someone is being really bossy, and you just leave, and they therefore learn, if I'm really bossy, then everyone just leave.
You're the king of an empty island, essentially.
Yeah. But also that free play without adult intervention will adjust for people's differences. So you know, the kids will go, the game is more fun if we all play, so little Johnny is tiny, so we're gonna just tweak the rules for him, and that kind of thing, which doesn't seem to be happening in
that kind of ties
books environment at all. It's like that needs to be forced, whereas I wonder whether, because Forest School is kind of predominantly free play, like the children arrive knowing that's the vibe, like the point of it is to play, and therefore it's important.
I think it pulls into what we were saying earlier about, is it, you know, do you protect it because it's so precious, or do you let everyone in because it's so precious? And if you asked that to children, I think you would get a different response if it's like, do you want the 5-year-olds to play with you during your only 20-minute break of the day? Maybe not. Are you happy for the 5-year-olds to play with you this morning? Because you're going to play all day, so you might play with them for 20 minutes, and so you can make adjustments. You're not being asked to make adjustments all day. You're saying, right, we'll children's play goes, right, we'll make adjustments for you, and you can't run as fast, and you're a bit bigger, so let's do that, because they know that they'll get their needs met in other ways. The
exclusion isn't all day either. So
no, exactly.
We might have children go in our like all day sessions. We might have a child come up to go, because they don't want to play what I want to play right now, and they're like really sad, but the sadness lasts for a minute or two, because there is the whole day, and inevitably it circles back round, and later on either that child is now involved in play with the others that is very fulfilling for them, or they have found their own individual very fulfilling thing because they've got the space and time to do that. So the exclusion and rejection doesn't feel as deep. Yeah.
And I think we're possibly more comfortable. So we talked before about this idea of like, we're very comfortable letting children graze their knees or fall off of something that's 6-7 meters high. I don't care. You can do, but
that's not true.
No, it's 8 at a minimum. But we are more comfortable as practitioners to go.
All I'm thinking about is spine damage now.
Okay.
You're talking to a woman who's just redone my first aid.
But we are more socially open to this idea of like, you might feel upset, and that is okay and valuable as a feeling. But I get the sense from Vivian's book that she feels like, oh my God, avoid at all costs.
I think it's because it's the persistent nature of it.
Well, it's the persistent, but also, it
if
ties
every
into
day
everything.
the same kid is in tears in the cubbyhole, then you have got.
But we would step in at that point. I'm not saying we wouldn't, but what I mean is, we are more happy to, not more happy, we're more comfortable with the long-term development idea that, someone will be rejected and will work through their feelings for 10 minutes because we're confident that they'll get back into play somewhere else. But if you feel very guilty about that, you're seeing a child upset, and you go, I must never let children be upset ever, that's going to affect you. Not negatively, but that will impact your judgments. And also, if you, like we're saying again, if you only have 20 minutes or a 45-minute break time, and it takes children 35 minutes to work through the feeling of being rejected at the start, you do have to make adjustments and go, right, well, what's better for them to have a whole day off to work through this feeling? I say whole day off, this whole break time is gone because they had to work through their feelings of rejection. And that means they never get the chance to rebuild it. Whereas if you looked at a percentage and went, how often were they rejected over a whole day of free play? It's going to be under 5%, under 2% even. But if you're rejected for the same amount of physical time in a 40-minute session, that could be 80% of that time is rejection time.
I'd be really, changing the topic slightly, I'd be really interested to know what settings people work in deal with this issue and how they deal with it. So like buddy benches and all these kind of like tactics that you hear schools employing. And because we're now out of the school system, people who are still there, what works, what doesn't work, how do people, or, have people experienced this in their forest school settings, and, how have they dealt with it? We haven't even really touched on this book's other half, which is that every couple of pages she launches into this story. She's writing stories at the same time, so she's got this whole kind of, it's almost like a parable, isn't it, about a magpie and a
it's supposed to be, I think it's supposed to be like an allegory, because an allegory is like a reflection, isn't it? But it is the most fun. That's one of the things that makes it feel, I'm getting angry.
Don't get angry.
After the second chunk of it, because they're not even clearly marked as like chapter 1 is theory, chapter 2 is this allegory, chapter 3 is theory, it appears halfway through, and so you'd be reading this thing where they're going like, I'm talking about reading the book as an experience, and you get this kind of like, and we wondered about whether the children would feel rejected, and we thought that actually there's kind of an interesting, the frog and the princess were going to the castle, and you just snap out of it. And I wonder if I now sat down and just read the allegory, did the opposite, would I get something out of it? But two chunks in, I just went, when I see that, because it's in italics, isn't it? Or it's in and I just went, I am skipping italics. I'm not reading that. It doesn't speak to me. Maybe if you're a different practitioner, and I don't know. Maybe I've missed it. Maybe we've missed the whole point of the book. Maybe there's a joke at the end of it where it goes, haha, not really. But I'm not going to read that bit. I can't. Do you know what I mean? It's already a slow book, and then to slow it down more, by kind of and they seem to be, the first couple that I read, just reiterating what she had said. I guess that's the point of an allegory, but they were just reiterating it in like a fantasy setting. She has a chapter about the children were saying it wasn't fair because the Poppy wasn't allowed to play, and then you get this weird parable where it's like the princess and the king won't let the frog into the castle, and I don't know whether the idea is that you're supposed to read that book to children, and they're supposed to get some sort of moral from it or whatever, but it's set badly with me. Did you read it?
I read half of it and then stopped and started just reading the real world stuff.
The actual book.
The actual book. But the actual book is not long enough.
No, it's an interesting. I don't know whether I think it should or shouldn't. I think it's a valuable thing. I think if you are someone who's listening to this and you're already, we're preaching to the choir of people who are, already on board.
But we've had this. It did remind me. We at one of the Forest School Association gatherings that you had just gone home, and
sounds like me.
You just gone.
Just leave. I can't deal with people.
And I did have a really interesting discussion with a group of practitioners where we talked about exactly this. So there's a group of people, they make a den, and then someone goes, "Can I come in?" "No, you can't come in." And I think I was the only person who
didn't make the children out.
Yes. And so they were like, "Really? What do you do then?" And I just talked about our kind of, things about looking after each other, looking after yourself, looking after the woods, and how we would deal with that situation. And they were all kind of like, "Oh my God, oh okay." but not in a negative. They weren't kind of judging us. They were going, oh, that's really interesting, food for thought. Like, it's very. So I think it is a forest school issue for sure, and it is one that people have very different views on. So I think it would be interesting reading.
They should have my view and no others.
I think one of the
You're just not going to bite.
No. This American Life has a podcast with Vivian Paley, kind of summarising the book and the idea.
Oh yeah,
we listened to it. So I would say that probably that is more interesting. And one of the reviews of this book I read, it was like the podcast actually does it much better, summarises the actual thing rather than the book waffling on about magpies.
Yeah. So I guess, it's not something that I think. So this is the other bit that I think is good about our practice, is that we have this book, we both read it, and we then have to, by nature of us being 50-50 leaders, have to have a discussion so that we're having a consistent approach. What I would find interesting is somebody who is entirely on their own, because the pros of that are that you can switch on a sixpence and go, I've read this book, I'm completely changing my practice.
Yeah.
Whereas you and I have not loads of layers of, we're not like a school where you're a class teacher and you want to change when you do maths, and that's 3 years of planning and 5 pitches to the head teacher. We have to just talk to each other and go,
tomorrow we're doing that.
Or what did you think of this? This is partly why we're doing it, is we just started recording our reflections and we've ended up with a podcast, and it's kind of, do you think there's anything from this that you would say, I'd like to start doing that in our practice, or that it's made you think, maybe not a recommendation from the book, but maybe anything that you've gone, I'm more aware of that,
or
definitely. I want to think about that.
I definitely think it forces your awareness, doesn't it? And it makes you, as she describes situations, then you can't help but think of children that you know and you work with, and situations that have happened, and looking at it through a different lens, and how it's just another kind of reflection tool, I think, and So I wouldn't say that it has any strategies in there that I go, I'm going to try that, but it's made me focus in on this particular issue of like rejection and inclusion.
I feel like it's slightly, but obviously not to the same extent. It's almost if the confrontation situation, was on a one of those old timey scales, and I think there's the chapter on one side of. It's okay not to share, where they're talking about rejection and all of this, and how you're protecting the rights of the people already playing, and that for me is very heavily weighted. And then this book kind of sits on the other side of that situation, where it goes, well, consider the person that's being rejected and has dragged that scale back, not to balance. I still think for me that there's something about the people who are already in play and in flow.
Do you know what though? Because I kind of thought that too, and then we haven't talked about the fact that it was the general election yesterday. We haven't talked about that, right? But driving this morning and thinking about it, I was like, but what if those scales that you've just described, and us going, but these people are already playing. What about if you look at that on a bigger scale and go, well, the people that've got the good stuff going on, you don't want to like screw them up. You don't want to screw them over, those people that have got all that lovely stuff. The people that don't have the lovely stuff, I mean, they'll probably just work it out. You just need to protect the rights of the people who've got the lovely stuff. That's the most important thing, because they've already got it. And it really sat uncomfortably with me, and I was like, hang on a minute, there is a level. It's that balance between like adult.
But that's what I mean. I'm not wholly dropping the scale on the side of people already playing and going, fuck the people that want to join.
Of course, but I thought it's just if you are confident, it's an awareness. If you're confident, if you're always reflecting on your groups and going, am I, as this practitioner, am I giving this balance, as you describe it, to like child-led, free play, choice, but without damaging anybody? And I guess that comes down to that looking after each other thing. It's like you assess each situation differently. Is that rejection happening because those people are going, it's really fun to reject people actually, and that person usually cries, and that's really nice to make that person cry. It makes me feel good, makes me feel better, and it makes me feel stronger with these other people that I'm always playing with. If it's that kind of rejection, that isn't looking after each other. And that is like, you need to step in. You can't just like absent yourself from it and go, It's
Yeah,
forest
yeah.
school, it's child-led. If they do that, then, you know, it'll
Yeah.
all come out in the wash and
That's
they'll get
anarchy.
over
That's
it.
anarchism. That's just
Yeah.
what's the point in you being there as a leader
Yeah,
at that
yeah,
point?
yeah.
You know.
But I can see how if you weren't confident on your journey or with a group that was really challenging and you're trying to find your place in that, you're trying to find out the relationship, or it's a new group to you, where, you know, do you have to go in very teacherly and go, hang on a minute, this isn't right, you're not allowed to talk to them like that, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
How's that going to make you feel as a leader, being like that?
Yeah.
So I find you've got to, it's all very well if it's working nicely, but if it's not, you have to keep on checking in, I would say, especially if you are working in a bigger group that is more of a cross-section of society, other than there's some families who know about forest school and they've chosen to send their kids here, which is a different kettle of fish.
Yeah.
So that
Self-selecting, isn't it?
yeah, and so that connection between, like, I guess, socialism, you know, or
Well, I think
alternatives
part of what's interesting, just to take it back to this book, because I think we're nearly done, is that she is very much talking about introducing something socially and emotionally. As a, you know, we've all got stuff that teachers said when we were 5 that are stuck in your head, for good or for bad, right? Stuff that, you know, like they say, part of the implicit responsibility of teaching is that children will value what you say as almost gospel. You know, you and their parents, if you're their teacher, you probably see them a little bit more than their parents sometimes. You can have a very big impact, right? Especially lower in the education system. So what she's talking about is putting something into children's ideology, thought processes, whatever you want to say, at a very young age, at the start of their schooling thing, and then saying, I think it will have these implications going forwards. If you were to take this book and you were doing a pop-up session on a school field with a group of year 6s who have already been in a class together for 6 years, 7 years, and then you go, well, I think I'm going to completely overhaul this system.
Yeah.
That's very different, and maybe you do need to have a firmer hand at the start, or maybe you need to reassess things, but she is almost working with, like, not a blank slate, but younger children who can more easily adapt and can take stuff on and go, oh, you know, some children, they put a new thing in at school, like, oh, you don't hang your coats up here, now you go and hang them up over there. 2 days in, you would think that the children had never hung their coats. For the vast majority of them, they just go, nope, okay, doing this. So I think she's got a bit of a different perspective on that, and when we're applying this to forest school, it's worth taking in holistically the whole history and background of everything of the group you're working with, rather than just going, oh, well,
of course, yeah,
you know. But where I do think the how okay not to share theories do drop in more easily to, actually, this is how we run things at forest school. I think that's much easier to kind of go, no, I'm protecting everybody's rights here and I'm doing all this stuff.
Yeah.
I think this would be much harder to put into an established group. You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
That would be my takeaway from it.
I've really enjoyed this discussion. I could carry on all day. I don't want to, but I could. I keep having thoughts. So that's why this book is good, I think. I've just been like, okay, well, how do you define that? Go back to, okay, not to share. There's a kid on the rope swing. Another kid comes up. I want to play. There's only one rope. Like, how does that?
Yeah.
But anyway, that would open up a whole other channel of conversation.
That's a whole different thing. I think if you
have enjoyed it, it's
would
been meaty.
if you want to have a bit of a challenge of your thought processes, it's not a long book, especially if you take out the bullshit story in it.
Yeah.
It's maybe, actually probably that is half of it, so it's probably 80 odd pages. I read it in about 3 hours.
Yeah.
I would definitely recommend people read it, if not recommend the ideas. Bye.
Bye.
You can visit Children of the Forest in person and get incredible face-to-face training on a range of different topics, whether you're a full-time forest school teacher, a classroom teacher, or senior management. Visit childrenoftheforest.com for details and to book on to all the upcoming training.